Hello. This podcast is going to talk about visual literacy and visual thinking. It's an area that many teachers overlook, although it's fundamentally important for kids to really develop consciously their visual literacy skills so that they can use them in understanding messages that they're being bombarded by, in understanding perhaps graphics or images that are included in their reading. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this video. What is visual literacy? It's the ability to interpret or make meaning from a visual image. If you look at those two images, and the one on the right is not cited because it's an image that I took, what do you think about? I think most of us probably would look at the image on the right and think lack of self-confidence, maybe the image on the bottom you might think sleepy, you might think overwhelmed, you might think frustrated, but we've learned how to interpret these behaviors in our own cultures. For example, the little girl on the right was actually being assessed, and I asked her some reading comprehension questions, and she did not understand the passage, and she wouldn't make eye contact. But in some cultures, when you ask a question, it's not appropriate for children to look at the teacher. And so sometimes we misinterpret body language, we misinterpret what's coming in front of us. So it's important to talk to kids and to consciously develop visual literacy. And there are many who argue that the beauty of visual literacy is that you can use it in your classroom and it levels the playing field. Students with significant disabilities, students who are learning English as another language can participate because they can tell what the message says to them and they can make connections and listen to other people's thoughts. So let me talk about why visual literacy matters. I think it's certainly part of the broader definition of literacy today. Literacy has moved beyond pen and pencil and reading to include multimedia. If our students are going to produce media that includes images, we want them to be thoughtful about their choices. We also want them to understand when they're viewing a particular video or advertisement that there may be a hidden message. For example, certainly a lot has been written about the sexualization of children, and if you look at some magazines, they'll show children in evocative poses, perhaps with a shoulder exposed. And our kids need to understand that that sends a message. For example, if an advertisement has a beautiful woman's body and no head, what does that say about women? I think lots of women in the feminist movement certainly would argue that it says that women are devalued. It's their bodies that matter. So we need to really expand our definition of literacy, and we need to rethink in terms of our teaching that we have to certainly teach our kids the fundamental basic skills of reading and writing, but it's much broader than that. A picture can be read. Look at these two children, both crying, but do they say the same thing to you? First of all, there's a difference in color. One is black and white. There's a difference in the age of the children. To me, the child on the bottom says tired, frustrated, perhaps mad because they didn't get something. Looks like nap time to me. But the child on the right, the little girl who is crying, says to me, something is really wrong, something really significant. So the messages that we get shape our world. It's important to really help our kids look at a picture and try to figure out what it says. And if you think about it, intuitively, you already know this. Many of you do picture walks with kids in the elementary school. You're looking at a book, you might look at the cover, you might predict what it's about. At the high school level, sometimes you use images and you try to pull from kids what they know about a particular content area. All of that is really showing examples of using visual literacy to gain meaning. So you have to start with a still image. And basically, a still image is anything that is not moving. So you could take a picture of this page and call it a still image. So they might be photographs, they might be graphs, or they might be a graphic drawing. It might be a cartoon, a collage, a painting, an illustration, anything that you select. So the content of what you pick is more important than the type of image that you pick. And it provides the lens that you're going to really use to kind of form the perspective that you want. So these are things that artists often consider, and if you took courses in graphic design and you learned all about this, The shape matters because it certainly focuses our attention. A curved line usually means something more gentle or pleasant, where jagged may be really strong or angry. The layout matters. Many of us pick an image and just use it exactly in the way that we took it, but you could do a lot more. You could take a piece of it. All of these aspects, shape, line, layout, and boundary, affect the understanding of an image. I'm going to look at several images. Some are mine and some are others that I've gotten from the internet. It's important to recognize that in the digital age that we live in, visual skills are underpinning everything that we do. And our kids are bombarded by messages. Many times we can't control them. They spend much more time online outside of school than they spend in school in some cases. And we need to help our kids develop filters to detect bias, to detect problematic areas. So for example, here's an optical illusion. Look at this for a few minutes, and I'm going to give you a minute or two to look. Is the window on the left or the right? It may switch for you. And part of that is visual information, and it's how you're looking at it. Let me show you another optical illusion. You probably saw this in your introductory sight courses. When you look at this image, do you see a young woman, a beautiful young woman, or do you see an older woman? It depends on what you're looking at. If you look at this part right here as the nose and the mouth, then you can see an older woman with white hair. But if you look at it differently, you can see a younger woman with a little bit of flair. So it's really how you look at it, what you choose to notice. Some of that is culturally defined. Let me give you an example of how our brain searches for patterns and tries to make sense. What is that? Well, probably you could guess it's a plant. You see kind of a red color there. Some child might guess an apple, but you don't really need much more than that. Some people probably already figured it out. What is it? Now it's pretty clear, isn't it? Oh, now it's certainly very clear. And you can see, even without the whole image, that it's a strawberry. Of course, that assumes that the viewer knows what a strawberry is. Here's another example. When you look at this, what hops out at you? The orange, right? But somewhere along the line already, you've noticed this is in a stadium. So there's a lot of research that suggests 70 to 90% of all input is visual. And there's certainly a lot written about visual learners. It's hard to be just a visual learner because we have words involved too. But let me show you some examples. Even in terms of word recognition, we use limited amounts of information. Let me show you a couple of examples. So what could this word be? Well, it could be almost anything that starts with a B sound. What will come next? It could be a vowel, or it could be a consonant. Could it be any consonant? No, it could be an L, it could be an R, but could it be a W, BW? No, that doesn't occur in English. But look what happens when I put the next letters in there. Well, we know that the next letter has to be a consonant. It could be bead, it could be beam, it could be beat. But look what happens when I put the next letter. You know automatically what the word is. What is it? Beach. Okay, so when we read, we look at the first part of the word and we don't even actually attend to the whole word, most of us. I'll show you another example. Suppose I give you the first syllable, and many of us chunk, and we want kids eventually to chunk in syllables. So you've got try. Well, what could the word be? Well, it could be triangle. It could be tricycle. But when I do that, what is it? Well, it could be triumphant. Possibilities are reduced, and the word is triumphant. We don't have to look at a whole word to know what it is. Our brain seeks patterns. Our brain tries to make sense. This is a piece of graphic design that John Langdon has developed, and if you look at it, the word is the same both ways, upside down. It's wordsmith going left to right, and if you turned it upside down, it's wordsmith the other way. If you saw that, it's because your mind sorted out the visual organization, how it was the same. That's called an anagram. There's some other elements that matter, but I think the most important consideration for you as a teacher is what's your purpose, what's important for kids to walk away from. And we need to recognize that texture and color can affect what kids notice. For example, when you first looked at this slide, probably hot drew your attention because it's very, very bright color, and it draws us, unless of course you're colorblind. Whereas the word soft and that kind of light aqua color doesn't really gain our attention. But if you look at the images on the right, the tree trunk on the very right makes me want to rub my hands across it, and I can feel that it's bumpy. And if I were to rub my hands through the sand, I would expect it to be perhaps warm and smooth. When we pick our image, we have to make sure that it's connected and portraying what we want to connect. Here's an image I took, and to me it's very gentle. I actually took it from a ship when we were in Alaska on a trip. And look at the difference of what happens with color. I kind of outlined this in kind of an orangey-ish yellow color. But look what happens when I change that. The coolness of the picture hops out at you more. Look what happens when I change it again. That changes it too. That makes it feel a little more springy. This was in fact in May. Alaska can be very, very cold. Let's look at another example. What does this image say to you? Well, to me, it says achievement, triumph, but I know this child. Or someone looking at this picture, it might say that she's wealthy because this is her bedroom. Look at all the blocks she has. Look at how her parents celebrate her on the wall. Look up here. Is she a Jewish child? Well, she is in fact. She's actually the daughter of one of my son's fraternity brothers from college, and these are blocks that I send her as a gift. And she's a delightful little girl, but look, she has no shoes on. But what you get from this particular piece depends somewhat on what you bring to it, so how you're going to use it. Let me show you another image. What does this image say to you? Well, for some kids who've never seen lobster, it's just chaotic color. It doesn't make any sense at all. For some people, it might say affluence. For some people who are vegans, it might say killer, any number of things. For me, since this is a picture of dinner my husband served on our 45th wedding anniversary, it says a lot about love. But part of your image choice and how you use it depends on who you are, whether you took the image, and so forth. Here's another example. This is an ice floe, actually, from a glacier in Alaska. And one of the things that I was really surprised about was the amount of blue color. I didn't do anything to touch this up. I'm actually quite a distance away from it. We were at the Mendenhall Glacier. This is a picture of it. And I was surprised to find that glaciers are not all white. There's a lot of dirt in them. They're not as pristine as you might think they are. But suppose a child knows nothing about glaciers. How would they make sense of this? What does this look like? Looks like maybe snow. What could you say about it? Don't look like a lot of trees. Well, because we were above the tree line in most cases. Let's look at another image. Okay, here's one we took on the same trip when we went to Vancouver. If there weren't people in the picture, if I cut out this whole portion, it doesn't quite look real. This is actually from the Bouchard Gardens. And what's interesting is that this used to be a mine. It was completely ruined, and a woman spent her whole life developing gardens and putting it back together. But it doesn't look quite real. But if I look at the next image, which is in the same area, it looks much more real. It's much more believable because of the colors. But notice also, I'm going to go back, I used gray here. So it doesn't really tie in closely with the color of the image. But when I go to the next image, I tried to match some of those orangey flowers. So color matters. And we want to think about incorporating visual images to develop our kids' understanding of text, to make sure that when they're reading that they don't skip all of those helps that are included in textbooks, but they try to figure out why did someone select them. For example, there are a lot of people who are very critical of history textbooks, certainly those that were written, when you were a child, because they mostly showed males, and many people argue that history was in fact his story, not her story. Well, one of the things that you can do as a teacher in teaching social studies and history is you can take pictures of children and give a sense of reality. Collectively, the form of the picture, the content of the picture, and the understanding of the context all blend together to make meaning. And you can't separate that from what the learner brings to the image. Let me show you some examples. If you look at this, the form, this is a very famous image of the March on Washington, Civil Rights, the 1960. You can see in the background the Washington Monument reflected in the pool, and the lines of the trees and the lines formed by the people really capture your image and pull it that way. This is a button that people were wearing on that march in 1963, and it talks about jobs and freedom. And freedom, for many people at the time, were thinking about voting rights, but it was beyond that. It was also about being able to go to school. And here's a picture of Ruby Bridges, a sweet little girl who was the first child to integrate schools in New Orleans. Now, I had the opportunity to have lunch with her at a national conference, the International Reading Association conference. I don't actually remember how I got invited to lunch with her, but I did, and we spent quite a bit of time. And I asked her if she was aware of the change that she was making, and she said no, she just didn't understand when she walked through the people, the lines of men, why they were shouting at her and spitting at her. So this is an actual photo, but look what happens when you look at Norman Rockwell's painting of this, and Ruby Bridges did publish a book in the last 10 years. And this was published about 3 years after Ruby Bridges was involved in integrating the schools. And I love the title that he chose. It was The Problem We All Live With. But look at the picture. You can see in the background, there's a tomato squashed against the wall. The word nigger is there, which is really a very hateful, racist word. And you can see on the marshal's arms, it's actually labeled Marshall. So in many ways, it's the contrast of the colors, the white on the girl's dress and the black of her skin. And this might be more powerful for people to talk about. But if you use a painting rather than a photo, it may give your kids a sense that it didn't really happen to a real person. So let me show you the images shown differently. Now, I started with the March on Washington. I kind of backed up into what led to it, but let's look at them in a different way. Can you see how even the order can affect your understanding as a viewer? So these are all the competencies that we want our kids to be able to do. Obviously, they need to understand what an image is. I'm going to just talk around this circle. They need to find images. Do they know how to go out on Google and find them? But there are some websites where you're not violating copywriting. Photo Peach is one, Flickr is another. The problem with using those with younger children is that sometimes they contain images that are not good. Let me think of an example. I remember one time I was looking for a picture of a whale, and I think I was using Flickr, and I clicked on it, and up came an image of a very large older woman who was swimming nude, and out of her rear end came a little voice bubble that said, "Save the whales." Well, that's really inappropriate. It's denigrating to older people. It's denigrating to people who are overweight. It's just not appropriate for school. Sometimes what I suggest teachers do is go and select the images that you want kids to choose from and put them in a file in Dropbox that they can access. You can put them on Diigo too, but I think that's harder for younger children. You want to spend time with your class looking at an image, trying to figure out what does it say, what does it mean to us. For example, I think that if we were to choose a picture of a black or brown Labrador retriever, now to me, my son has a lab, a beautiful, huggy, wonderful old lab that loves to lay on my feet and give me kisses. And I love that dog, but I might feel very differently about that dog if I was raised in a housing project and the dog was one that was used to sniff out drugs, or if the dog was a German Shepherd and used to attack people. So it makes a difference the point of view that you come from. So evaluating the images matters. Choosing images for your own purposes that match what you want. For example, if I'm going to do a project on cats, I'm going to be looking at African lions, right? It wouldn't be appropriate to put in an image of a panther, for example. I mean, it might be the cat family, but it doesn't quite fit what I'm doing. We want our kids to have opportunities to create visual media, and you're going to do that this week. And you know, the next one is really important to me. We want our kids to really cite the images that they've used. If you have younger children and you want to put all the images into a folder for them to access, I would put the citation right there. Just hook it together so that they have it at the beginning. Those are all the competencies our kids need to develop, but they don't develop them overnight. It takes time, and it takes concerted practice, and it takes a conscious focus by the teacher. There are a lot of visual literacy ideas. You might look at images on a topic for a point of view. For example, you might have an image. I'm going to use the civil rights movement again. You might have an image where someone is looking up at an officer with a baton in the hand. Or you might have an image where someone is looking at a child trying to integrate, and it tells a different story. You might ask kids to pick 5 images to tell a story. You might pick a word. Let's say the word is happiness, and you might pick 5 images that to you represent happiness. You might have a slideshow where your kids all go out and pick a word that shows bravery to them, and you put it in a slideshow, and then they can see that bravery can be very different. For example, I'm really comfortable in public speaking, and sometimes at national conferences, I have a couple thousand people in the audience, and yet I have a friend who's a wonderful first grade teacher. She was upset every single time she had an open house and had to talk to her children's parents. So bravery can be very different based on your life skills and your experiences. Another example would be to take many images on a topic, for example, the Great Depression or lumberjacking, and put them together before you study the topic so kids can predict what they're going to learn about. So if it's the Great Depression, taking images of people waiting in bread lines, taking images of families with everything they owned piled on top of a car, taking images of mothers and children living in a shack, very, very thin. Developing a collage. So there are any number of visual literacy ideas. I put some references down there for you. Some are fairly recent, but visual literacy is something we're going to explore this whole week. You should keep it in the back of your mind. I think it's something that we assume that kids understand, and often they have difficulty with it. I'm going to ask you to take those still images and to put them in an Animoto. An Animoto basically is a tool. It's a paid tool if you want to make more than a 30-second video, but you as a teacher can join the educators at Animoto for free and make 3-minute videos. So basically you add images, you do limited text, and you pick from some music, and in the end it produces a very, very professional video. So you're going to be really tying together visual information and audio information, but there's no voice. And I'll talk more about that within the course. So here are some references. All of these were used in my thinking about this, and I recommend them to you with enthusiasm. Thanks so very much.